and there's a slight change in the schedule. We had to permute some things. Terry's got to catch a flight, and so Terrence Sejnowski, who's head of laboratory at the Salk Institute, is going to present first, and then later we'll go to the other two scheduled speakers. We are trying to cut things a little shorter. They were initially supposed to have 20 minutes, but it's just not going to work, so we have to go to shorter talks to be done by 5 o'clock.
So yesterday I said I had hoped that there would be some real mathematical advances that we would see and would maybe continue from our discussions. And I was very impressed. I think that some of the presentations really pointed in a direction which I think there's going to be some real gold. So I was really impressed with Peter Bartlett's talk. I mean, I would have never guessed you could squeeze any more juice out of linear least squared. I mean, that is really impressive in high-dimensional space. That just shows you that, you know, it's really the next frontier of understanding the geometry and how do you optimize in spaces of millions of dimensions. I think is really going to be, it's wide open. Chaim Samplinsky's talk, which began to really set the stage for understanding the manifolds. It's geometry that we're trying to understand, and we need geometrical methods and statistical methods for being able to understand the subspaces and how they advanced through the layers of the deep learning network. So I think geometry is really what's emerged. I think it's very exciting. Now there's another point that I want to make having to do with the adversarial examples. Now everybody thinks that's a bug. Oh, it's terrible that, you know, you can make these small changes and you can flip the boundaries. Quite to the contrary, this is how we're going to understand the geometry of these very high dimensional spaces. How do you figure that out? Well, you perturb it and you see where those boundaries are and what the shapes look like and so forth. But this, by the way, is a technique that's being used in neuroscience. And so how do you understand something, say a single neuron somewhere in the middle of the visual system, what it's contributing to perception? Well, what you do is you perturb it, and you see how it changes behavior. And I can give you many examples of that. So we need to start doing that, but not just at the input level, but also at the intermediate levels in these deep learning networks. And I think that what will come out of that is a very interesting kind of insight into what these subspaces are going to look like, and especially looking at how the discrimination emerges. Now, the last thing I want to mention has to do, people were reminiscing about the 90s, and so I thought I would too. I remember back in the 90s that one of the arguments against looking at the brain as an inspiration was you know, birds. You know, if you want to learn how to fly, do you want to replicate, you know, the feathers and all of the ways that birds flap their wings and so forth? Ha ha ha! No, we're engineers. We want to actually do it, you know, in a principled way. Well, so actually a couple of years ago, I read a biography of the Wright brothers by McCulloch. Has anybody here read that? It's a beautiful book, and I highly recommend it. So it turns out that the Wright brothers spent a lot of time looking at birds. Now, why is that? It's because they wanted to figure out how is it that birds could glide with so little power, because they wanted to create a glider, a powered glider. And it wasn't just that. They actually built a wind tunnel to test some of their theories about, you know, the wing airfoil and, you know, how do you control the plane. And when they went to Katy Hawk, you know, they went there because there was a big wind and they were able to go over the ground at a lower speed. So when they crashed, and they crashed many times, you know, they wouldn't kill themselves. Well, they came pretty close, actually. So what this illustrates is that they were inspired by biology, by birds, but it wasn't the feathers, it was the principles of aerodynamics, which at the time were very primitive, by the way. And all the attempts by the Army to create a plane was basically a huge, very heavy device with a big engine that just flopped every time that they tried it. And their technique, which was very light and was based on aerodynamic principles, was really the way that they got to where they were. And so they weren't just bicycle shopkeepers. They were real engineers. They were scientists. They really understood some of the basic principles. And I think that's what we're looking for from the brain. We're not looking for the details, because that's biology. What we're looking for are the general principles, architectural principles, mechanisms for regularization. There was a paper in Science about 6 months ago by Sackler Navlaka, who's a colleague of mine at the Salk Institute, which was a model of a fly mushroom body. It's a part of the fly brain that has to do with memory. And he made a very good case that it's a hash code for storing many different, in high-dimensional input spaces for getting him into a relatively small memory store. But it had a special property. It was neighborhood preserving, so that if you had similar odors, it would be mapped into similar codes in the mushroom body. And it turned out to be a better code than the existing hash codes in computer science. So this is, I think, a way to go. It's a way to think about the brain as being a source of algorithms. What algorithms are being implemented? And I think it's going to be of great benefit to neuroscience, this perspective, and I think it's just beginning. But I was very pleased that, in fact, there was a mixture here of people coming at this problem from these two different directions, and I think they'll be mutually beneficial. I'm really excited about what I've heard at the meeting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where it's going to head. And thank you very much.